I don't think God has a filing cabinet up there in heaven where he checks all the California marriage licenses.
So if you fall in and out of love quite frequently and you engage in sexual activity, then how does that look in the sight of God?
Sexuality is just another form of communication, and carefully monitors whose penis is in whose vagina. In the Bible, the only thing that was required for a marriage is to declare between two people a spiritual and emotional commitment to each other. And so then it was expected
between the two is inside of God, as good as, a marriage certificate that is done in front of a judge or,
That's right. No, it was in front of the family usually. It was a family arrangement. In the church that I attend, even to this day, marriage, for example, is a family ceremony. It's not a church ceremony. It's not an official worship service ceremony. You can have a wedding in a worship service, but that's a special deal. It's a marriage that is a family affair, and it was in the Bible. People wanted to get married, or their family thought it was a good idea for two people to marry, so they got together and they said, I marry you, and the other person said, I marry you, and it was a marriage. I don't think God has a filing cabinet up there in heaven where he checks all the California marriage licenses
with all
and carefully monitors whose penis is in whose vagina.
Are you all hearing this?
That's not the case.
You do have a chapter in your book that you say falling in and out of love. So if you fall in and out of love quite frequently and you engage in sexual activity, then how does that look in the sight of God?
Well, there are boundaries on our sexuality, but they are not sexual boundaries so much as they are commitment boundaries. So that sexuality is such a deep and intimate and foundational relationship that it has to be channeled in the context of genuine and authentic commitment. It's very interesting that the terminology that we use for spiritual worship is the same terminology that we use for sexual development, sexual play, and sexual achievement. For example, if we are talking about our spiritual relationship with God, we start out by saying that people have a contact, and then they have a connection with God. And then we have communion with God. And then we have union with God.
And this is how it progresses.
It's a progressive crescendo. And then we go from union with God to ecstasy, spiritual ecstasy, and eternity. The only other setting in which we use the same language is sex. We have a contact. I meet you in a grocery store parking lot. I say, well, geez, that's a beautiful lady, and so I say, I'd like to give you a ring sometime. You give me your card. So then I call you, and so now we don't just have an encounter, we have a contact, and we have a connection. And then we cultivate our relationship, and so we move from a connection to a communion. And we have shared life, we have a shared fellowship. Intellectually and socially and spiritually, we start to really profoundly appreciate each other. We say to each other, geez, we're on the same wavelength, isn't that wonderful and isn't that fun? And so then we make love together and we move.
After how long is it okay to make love together? Is it after the first date, the second date, maybe going out about a month, 2 months, 3 months? When is the rightful time to consummate that contact?
Well, I've known people who were in love at first sight.
Yes.
I would caution them to make sure they find out a little bit about each other. I've known people who have cultivated communion for 4 years before they finally come to the realization that they don't just have a contact and a connection and a communion, but they have a union. And so then it's authentic for them to invest that union in total communication.
So there is no set structure. It depends on each relationship. It depends on each format and how they've come together. And sometimes it could be a lot quicker for it to happen, but...
That's very accurate. That's precisely the way to say it. Because it depends always on the authenticity of that moment and that relationship and that setting. And so in our sexual crescendo, we go from connection to communion to union, and then to ecstasy, and then to a sense of being connected with eternity.
Well put, but we know that people do take this sexual ecstasy into a whole different level at times. Rather than the steps and the way you describe the true intimacy takes place. There are those that are sex addicts.
Well, casual sex is like eating a delicious, very carefully prepared exotic meal when you have no culinary sense at all. You're just a dumb fool who doesn't know how to appreciate good food. Or it's like some clod stumbling into an art gallery and wandering around and not having any sense at all of the majestic beauty that is all around him. To be just casual in sexuality is exploitive, and that cannot be honorable or good or ultimately gratifying, and it certainly is not authentic. It's abusive, exploitive. There are people who don't know any better than casual sex. And, of course, there are people who are not well psychologically or emotionally or sexually, and who are destructive in their lack of appropriate boundaries of authenticity, and don't realize that sexuality is just another form of communication. Sexual play is just another form of communication, and if it's going to be real and authentic and honest and genuine communication of truth, it needs to be an expression of a real commitment. And short of that, it's going to inevitably do damage and be abusive.
Let's go back to what you said, that God said, let us go among them and let's create them in our image, male and female.
Yes.
So male and female, they are equal in the sight of God?
No question about that. Yes, indeed. There are people who have said and still say that somehow or another the man is the head of the house. That's a really dumb idea. Dumb idea, because it doesn't work, number one. Number two, it would be just as dumb an idea to say that the woman is the head of the house. And there are a lot of households in which women are the head of the house. Well, the fact is that that's based on Genesis 3. In Genesis 3, it says, after Adam and Eve are pitched out of the Garden of Eden, God says to them, now, things are going to be a bit tougher for you. Adam, to make a living, you're going to sweat, pulling weeds, dealing with brambles and thorns, trying to make something grow to support your family. And Eve, it's going to be tougher for you. You're going to bear a lot of children. And every time you have a baby, it's fairly painful. But you won't be able to repress your longing to have sex. So you'll depend upon your husband to provide you sex. Your longing will be toward him. And people have taken that and interpreted it as though it's a command, a curse, that women are subservient to men. That's not what it says. That certainly isn't what God intended. Of course, that whole story is a myth, but it does describe a very crucial part of human existence. That's why that myth is in the Bible. It tells the truth. But the truth it tells is not that the male is superior to or authoritative over the female. It just says, look, females are going to like to have babies. To have babies, they're going to be longing for their husbands to make love to them. And, you know, the husband might say, well, I'd rather go fishing or hunting. God has linked this in such a way that our desire for sexual relationship is stronger than any other drive except our spiritual drive. And so it says, Eve, your desire shall be to your husband, and he shall rule over you. That only means that he's going to be in a position to decide whether you have sex now or a couple of hours from now, depending on what he wants to do.
So it's up to male to be the one that is going after the female. I mean, we see that in nature
Well,
as well.
we're both supposed to go after each other.
Yes.